With that said, though, let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, don't know if you heard, it was apparently, I hadn't really heard much about this, but apparently it was Coach K's final game as head coach at Cameron Indoor Arena. The fans, some of them have been camping out since January. Those poor students camping out since January. Fans paying upwards of $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000 for tickets. You had all the dignitaries in the building. You had Kyler Murray. You had Adam Silver. You had Jerry Seinfeld. You had Ken Jeong. The camera spent more time on Ken Jeong than they did on Coach K. And then the game started. And then the game went essentially the way that none of us expected. If I had done a Friday episode, I would have absolutely picked Duke. I'm not going to sit here and pat myself on the back and say I saw this coming because I did not at all. As Carolina goes into Durham, Coach K Court, Cameron Indoor Arena, final score 94-81, 55 points in the second half. Run Duke out of their building. Their own building on Coach K's final day. What can you say? And like I said a minute ago, listen, we'll have some fun with the Duke fans. They were a little emotional, a little upset. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I do want to start with Duke itself because when I look at Duke and when I look at this team and this moment and this game as it pertains to Duke's entire season, I do wonder, like, is it time to officially start worrying about Duke? Like, we always kind of figured, like, oh, it's Coach K's last ride. They have arguably the most talented roster in college. But no, once March comes, oh, boy, watch out. Well, March is here, and they just got crushed on their home court. And it's crazy because, listen, again, what I said a minute ago, I can't pretend as though, oh, I saw this coming and you could see it coming a mile away. No, I couldn't. Listen, I was the guy as of about 3 weeks ago. I said that I believe that there was only 5 teams that could win the national championship in college basketball this season, and they were Arizona, Auburn, Kentucky, Gonzaga, and Duke. And if you remember, at that time, like, I don't even think that was a controversial take. I mean, there was a couple teams that I left out that people got mad about, Purdue and Baylor. But essentially what I did was it was the 4 number 1 seeds in Joe Lunardi's bracket at the time, Gonzaga, Arizona, Kentucky, and Auburn. Those were the 4. And then Duke, which was, I think, indisputably probably the most talented starting 5 in basketball. And so when I put Duke in, I said, look, they have so much freaking talent that, like, at some point, like, they can just overwhelm people with that talent. And many of you saw Duke in person at the Champions Classic. I know we have a lot of Kentucky fans that listen to this show. That talent just overwhelmed what is one of the best teams in the country in Kentucky. I was at the Duke-Gonzaga game where I think that was maybe the best example yet of what Duke is capable of when they're operating at their full potential. That game, Paolo Banchero starts out. You know, at the time we're talking about him as maybe the possible number 1 pick in the draft. I mean, he still could be, but he has 20 points in the first half. I'm sitting there, I covered the game, but my uncle, who's a Duke Law alum, was at the game, and he doesn't follow the team day to day. He goes, who is that? That guy belongs in the NBA right now. Like, that was how good Paolo was that night. Mark Williams was flying all over the court. Oh, by the way, Paolo goes out with cramps. Wendell Moore takes over the game late. And so in that game, that might have been a metaphor for how good Duke can be. They have 5 guys on this roster that could potentially be number 1 pick, first round picks. The 3 guys I named, Paolo Banchero, Wendell Moore, and Mark Williams, on top of their point guard Trevor Keels, on top of their shooting guard AJ Griffin. So when I say, like, I still think Duke can win the national, like, I still truly believe that. They're the most talented starting 5 in college basketball. But what I do also think is that at some point we have to stop projecting how good a team can be, and we have to start to accept, like, who they are right now, right? Like, I'll give you an example outside of college basketball. Remember all season long when the Kansas City Chiefs in football and the NFL were either losing games early or they were winning, like, these really ugly, weird games where, like, Mahomes would throw, like, 3 picks, but they'd win, like, 17-13 or whatever. Like, there was just like this 2-month stretch where it's very clear. You're like, this is not the Kansas City Chiefs I remember from 2 years ago when Patrick Mahomes was throwing 6 touchdowns a game. This is not that. And you just kept hearing all these analysts, oh, they'll figure it out. They'll figure it out. And, like, I guess to a degree they did. They made the AFC Championship game. But then we watched the AFC Championship game, and it's like, whoa, wait a second now. They couldn't do anything in the second half. They were flawed all year, and they got exposed in the biggest game of the season against the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, they were great the week before against the Buffalo Bills, but it's kind of like Duke. Duke has those moments where they beat Gonzaga. You're like, oh, my God, they're incredible. But let's be realistic, and let's look at what they've done since. Because if you look at the ACC this year, by the way, Duke has clinched the ACC regular season title. No disrespect to them. But at the same time, let's kind of peel back some of those losses. Yes, since the Gonzaga game and since ACC play started, they have had those moments where you're like, oh my God, they're unbelievable, which is why up until a few weeks ago, I didn't want to take them off that list of national championship contenders. They went to Syracuse last weekend and destroyed Syracuse. It was never competitive. First North Carolina game, destroyed them. It was never competitive. They played Wake Forest early in the year when Wake Forest was playing its best basketball, fringe top 25 team, destroyed Wake Forest at home. Never competitive. So I don't want to completely discredit what they've accomplished. This isn't some big anti-Duke rant or anything. But at the same time, like we can also talk about some of these losses now, right? I mean, think about their 4 losses in ACC play. Miami at home. Miami is just now getting on the right side of the bubble, probably have played themselves into the NCAA tournament, but that was at home. Lose to Florida State on the road. Florida State is not making the NCAA tournament this year, so they lost on the road to a team that isn't making the NCAA tournament. Virginia, they lose at home to Virginia, who is on the wrong side of the bubble right now, probably not going to get into the field of 68 in the NCAA tournament. They lose to North Carolina on Saturday at home, in a game where they were obviously favored by a significant margin. And so let's just talk about that resume right there, right? And I know the ACC is a little bit down this year and all that stuff. 4 ACC losses. Nothing to be like ashamed about. We're talking about a Duke team that has the talent to win a national championship, though. 2 of those losses to teams that probably aren't going to make the tournament. The 2 that are going to make the tournament, one of them, North Carolina, didn't really clinch that tournament bid until they beat Duke on Saturday. And 3 of them are at home. 3 home losses, 2 losses in conference play to teams that aren't going to make the NCAA tournament. Does that sound like a team to you that's magically going to flip a switch and beat, Arizona in an Elite 8 and Kentucky in a Final Four and Gonzaga in a title game? Or Gonzaga in an Elite, fill in the blanks, whatever. Beat Villanova in a Sweet 16 and then Gonzaga in an Elite. That doesn't sound to me like a team that's going to win 3, 4, 5 games in a row against really good competition. And by the way, once you get to the second round, I mean, there's going to be some good teams. Duke's probably going to be a 2 seed, maybe a 3. They're going to have to face real teams in the second round, let alone the Sweet 16, let alone the Elite 8, let alone the Final Four, let alone a national championship. And I think we all agree that this team is good enough to win the national championship, so it speaks to a little bit how disappointing the season is, right? Like, you can even go to other teams, right? Like Kentucky. Calipari gets criticized for everything. You can like him, you can hate him, and if you're not a Kentucky fan, most people don't like him. But think about Kentucky this year, and I tweeted about it, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in the show. But Calipari, just think about it. Calipari, they have 6 losses this year, just like Duke. Remember, I said Duke has lost 3 at home, 2 to teams that aren't going to be in the NCAA tournament, 2 to basically bubble teams. Well, Kentucky has 6 losses as well. All 6 are either on the road or neutral court, which means they won every game at home. Doesn't matter who the opponent is, who's injured, who's banged up, who's this, who's that. Kentucky won them all. On top of that, on the road, they face like all these teams every team that they lost to is going to be an NCAA tournament team. Lost to Duke on a neutral, lost to Notre Dame, which Notre Dame's going to be an NCAA tournament team. Lost at Auburn, lost at LSU, lost at Tennessee, lost at Arkansas. Those are all great teams. I mean, Auburn, Tennessee, Arkansas, Duke. I mean, you start talking about of the 6 losses that they have, 4 of those teams could be second weekend teams. They could be Final Four teams for that matter. And so you just start comparing resumes. You can criticize Kentucky for whatever you want. They basically won every single game on their schedule that they were supposed to. Now, Duke, on the other hand, again, I can't keep reiterating it, but they lost now to 2 teams that are definitely probably not going to make the NCAA tournament and 3 times at home. I think about another team like Arkansas. Arkansas, every time their fans want to celebrate, people criticize them. Well, I mean, come on now. I mean, all your big games were at home, and you beat Auburn and Kentucky and Tennessee at home, and then you lost to Tennessee on the final game of the season on the road. And it's like, yeah, but they still beat some really good teams at home. They're clearly playing their best basketball right now. You go on and on down the list. There's a lot of teams that are playing their best basketball right now. So I don't want to belabor the point. But the point that I am trying to get to, we'll talk a little North Carolina, and then we'll talk about those crying fans, is the idea that, like, this notion that, I think it's time to officially worry about Duke. And maybe I'm just lost in the college basketball ethos echo chamber right now, and maybe other people are talking about this. But I do think there's this notion that, once the tournament starts, Duke, they'll be fine, blah, 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 this and that. Like, I don't know that I feel that way. I've been watching sports long enough to know that when a team is inherently flawed, or I don't even know if inherently flawed is the right word. If a team traditionally plays down to its competition over and over and over again over the course of the season, at some point they're going to play down to somebody in the tournament and they're going to lose. I'm telling you right now, I look at some of these teams they could face in the second round. Memphis, who we're going to talk about in a minute, Memphis can beat Duke. I'm just telling you they can. Some of these schools that you probably haven't watched much of, I've been watching them. Boise could beat Duke if Duke plays down to its level of competition. Colorado State in the Mountain West, Wyoming in the Mountain West. I'm just bringing them up as examples to say, you say, there's no way that Duke would lose to that team in their bracket. Well, I don't know. I mean, they lost to Virginia at home. They're not going to be a tournament team. They lost at Florida State. Florida State's not a tournament team. So I don't want to belabor the point. I want to move on to Carolina. And, of course, on top of that, the crying fans and all that stuff. I do want to talk a little bit about Coach K's legacy as well. But I just bring it up to very simply say, at a certain point, we have to stop pretending like this is a team that is just going to magically flip a switch. And we got to start accepting that they are what their record says they are and that they take really bad losses. And that would be a concern of mine going into March.